My name is Rosemary Geralt. I am a relationship and life transformational coach from Cape Town. And I have discovered that everything in South Africa is not doom and gloom. I have found inspiring, creative, incredible people that are doing amazing things out there where most of the population thinks that we are doomed. And one of my guests today is the amazing, talented Andrew James Hofmeyer, who was born in Johannesburg. He worked in Taiwan, he's worked in the UK, and he works in multimedia. Currently, he is now working in a studio in Franschhoek, and Andrew works in mixed media, and he does beautiful, whimsical characters to give people joy, to make us smile. And the one that fascinated me the most was the fox that appears in urban landscapes, in multimedia wallpaper, wood, ink drawings. And with no further ado, I would like to welcome and thank and introduce you to the Foxman. And we are going to discover and explore the story of Andrew and the fox. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning, Rose. It's lovely to be here. Thank you for having me.
It's great. So, Andrew, tell us about how the story of the fox evolved, your story of the fox.
I've been living in the UK, and if you've been in the UK, it's got a sense of being inhabited and having been lived in for thousands and thousands of years. And it's very tame by comparison to South Africa. But the one place that really kind of offset that was the urban fox. And the urban fox in the UK, when you're in the city centres in London, like the busiest streets in the boroughs, and there will be a fox that will cross your path. And when you see that fox, suddenly there's this really funny mind shift where you are taken back to your primordial self, and you don't know whether this animal is going to bite you, whether you should feed it, whether you should run away. And it really gave the sense of absolute wild and wilderness, and that sense of the not knowing what's going to happen next. And in my time while I was living in Brighton, which is about 45 minutes south of London, and he became a real symbol for me, a symbol of that wild, that sense of adventure, of excitement, that seeking. As I started to draw him more, I started to do sort of city landscapes, would be all streets and the road markings, and I started thinking about signs and symbols for our life and how we're directed all the time by different things, whether it's you start getting directed by your parents, and then you go on to be directed by your career, or to the very minute details, the instructions on your cereal box of how to pour it, or the instructions on your coffee cup, how not to get burned. So the painting started to be the streets with those, and our human nests, our human habitations, how they are our burrow. In England, the fox it thrives in those urban environments. You get more foxes in the city than you do in the countryside because we've created all of this habitat. We found them interesting in that way because we live at a time where our resources are getting more and more scarce, and suddenly there's this animal that's loathed by half the population, absolutely adored by the other half, but it's surviving, not only surviving, but it's thriving in these environments because it does what we all are thinking about doing. It recycles, it's an opportunist, it takes advantage of other people's waste. And as a result, you get them everywhere. When you see them, there is magic. I used to spend my evenings for my dram of whiskey, and I'd walk around the streets at between 10 and 2 in the morning looking for foxes, and they are everything that they're made out to be in the stories. They're cunning, they're smart, they're clever, they're fearless, they're wonderful. And then gradually, as I did more and more foxes, people just started to know me as the Foxman. So you'd meet people, you go, "Oh no, I'm an artist," and they go, "Oh, you're the Foxman," and it kind of rolled from there. And people give you names, it's you go with it.
Huge work that you did in wallpaper. And the little girl in whose room it is spends hours, and she's not even 2 yet, and she spends hours looking for the fox out of the most unexpected places, and a big fox and a tiny fox, and it's incredible the way she hunts for the fox. So it truly is really, really magical. Andrew, so tell me about your successes as the Foxman.
The successes that I really value are the connections that I have with people. I think you really hit the nail on the head with the little girl looking for the foxes. So when I have exhibition, I usually make a point of inviting children. And I'll have little games for the children to play. Like I'm very resistant to this idea that art is something static that happens on a wall and you stand in your little place and you look at it and you appreciate it and you move on. Like I've always felt I used to put up posters encouraging people to touch, because the works are on wood. Wood is such a tactile thing. I remember so distinctly from school being told, don't touch, you look with your eyes, not with your fingers. And I think that's rubbish. It's like half of your sensory experience. You can't see weight. You can see texture, but you can't feel it. So, you know, like when I get commissions, I've got many pictures from people of their children interacting with the paintings, things that are special for them. And I always imagine that's your narrative with that little girl looking for the fox is part of the narrative that's in that painting. You know, there's a narrative between the big foxes and the small foxes, and everybody finds something different. You know, some people are in on tiny details, other people zero in on these big details. So, you know, getting that kind of feedback, it really warms me. It's like if you can spend your whole life making art and never reach into somebody's soul and make them smile.
Andrew, your fox definitely makes people smile and brings a lot of joy, and it really is a magical experience for people. Andrew, tell me now about your successes. Where have you had exhibitions? I know that I went to one of your exhibitions in Berrydale, and as you were saying, all that interactive, touching, tactile with children, because not only at school, I mean, as children, we were brought up to say, don't touch, just look. And you're so right about not using all of our senses. So part of that is suppressed. So you have brought that out beautifully. So where have you had exhibitions, and are you currently having any?
Rose, I've had shows in Taiwan. I mean, I was teaching at the time and I never did anything permanent, but I'm a very emotional being and I respond to spaces very strongly. So it probably doesn't make the best business sense, but when I'm in a space and I really respond to that space and I like it, then my next step is to approach the owner of the establishment. And then if I like them as well, I'm very choosy. And then I'll see about having a show after that. So when I was in Taiwan, I exhibited in a pizza parlor and then Mary Jane's Pizza, and after that I exhibited in a yoga studio where I actually went and spent time in the yoga studio doing sketches, and then transformed that space. So I think transforming spaces is also really exciting for me. In the UK, I did a few exhibitions in coffee shops, and then I had the Fox, the one that launched me as the Foxman, I suppose you could say. I had that in a gallery. It was in a 200-year-old stable. And again, transforming that space. So there was an open courtyard and we hung umbrellas over the top. So as you walked in, you were kind of prepared for this wonderland. Coming back to South Africa, we moved to Swellendam. And there I did a few markets and things. You know, as an artist, you're always looking for opportunities to show your work. And eventually I discovered the Magpie. They're two guys from Cape Town, and they've been running the Magpie Art Collective for about 20 years, I think, in Berrydale. And they've got a beautiful space. And I approached Shane about having a show there. And then I followed that up with another show there a year later. Between that, my main gallery is probably in Cape Town at Art Park in Kalk Bay. They moved quite a lot of my work through there, and then various small shops. Quirky Me, I think they've got a few locations around Cape Town. There's some at the waterfront. I've got work in sort of Nutuk side, Tenga. But really also I was just looking for those opportunities. You know, that's I think it's really important to keep growing. And part of that is taking your work, you know, art. Like I think it applies to a lot of things, but especially with art, because it does feel so personal. It's often a challenge to go and expose yourself to new people. Whenever you show work, you're effectively making yourself really vulnerable and putting yourself in a space where they can say, oh, well, that's not really what we do here, and looking for more spaces. So that's currently where I am. I would love to get work in, and then of course Orms, they did a wallpaper series, which is how they managed it. So it was part of that, and that obviously opens up for more exposure. I think from that, I started to get phone calls from Australia with interior designs wanting to know if I could do wallpaper there as well. That's where we are at the moment. Most of my clients that I get, they come through social media, Instagram and Facebook, which has been a really good tool for me.
I can really understand when you say you need to feel connected to the space and the person, because you're leaving part of your soul there. And you want to know that they're taking care of that. I really understand that. So, Andrew, who's been your biggest support in this whole process?
Rose, my wife, is amazing. I think she's probably my biggest fan. She's the one who gives me the pep talks when I get down, and she's the one who reminds me of all the good things that have happened. I think when you are, I think people in general, especially today, I think we're very critical of ourselves, and we get myopic vision sometimes where we don't see the full picture. And sometimes we allow small setbacks to become very big. So my wife's been amazing. My family, my aunts, and her family, you know, families, they're always the initial ones who give you that support and make you think like, yes, I can do this, and like the praise and the support that way. I'm very, very connected to my family, and I think it's one of the reasons I'm probably still here in South Africa as a young person, where I think most of my cohort is gone. So yeah, family, friends. I've got some amazing fans. Well, I'll tell you a story. I think my work's a lot about stories, but at that first exhibition in Barrydale, I had a very big piece, and just around that time, I got a Facebook message from a guy called Frankie, and it's fresh in my mind because this was about 4 years ago, but I'm still in contact with Frankie. And Frankie sent me a message on Facebook saying, "Oh my God, I saw your work," and he told me this whole story about his grandmother. And his grandmother used to tell him stories about the buckoor jakkals, the bat-eared fox that lived at the bottom of the garden under the shed. And when Frankie stood in front of these pictures, it transported him straight away back to his grandmother. And he's gone on to study theatre. He does costume design for Broadway shows and stuff. But it was that moment of transcendence where suddenly he wasn't Frankie, the master student in theatre, but he was that little boy sitting in front of his mother listening to that story. And now Frankie's been amazing. I think he's still one of my biggest fans. He often buys stuff when he can't afford it, and he's like, "Oh, Andrew, I'm so sorry, I can't pay you. Do you mind if I pay you off?" And it's like, I would happily give him work, because he's such an amazing man. He's such an amazing character. And it's like little things like that. So it's like the first commission I ever got was in Brighton, and I'm still in touch with Karen. It's like I wish her happy birthday, and I see what she's going on. And it's like, it's those relationships, you know, those ongoing things. And I think especially the nature of the paintings, they embed you in that person's life. It's like, it's not just a painting, but you actually become enmeshed in their stories. It's like, I can't do that painting unless I get them to share with me where they've lived, what their loves are, and things like that. So often I get very connected to the pieces, and I get very connected to the people. So those relationships maintain and they carry on. So yeah, like I feel, I really do very strongly feel like I'm supported by all those people, all those little bits of support along the way, those little ones that make you able to reach for the next step and to keep going. And I'm very, very grateful for all those people that are in my life still.
You know, Andrew, I was just listening to you, and as you started speaking, I was thinking you're not only brilliant and talented and magical, putting stories onto a piece of wood or a piece of paper or a piece of parchment or silk or whatever you've done, but you also have a brilliant narrative. And it's all about stories, because what people are doing, they're buying your story because they resonate with it. And it's okay if other people don't resonate with it. It's absolutely fine. So,
Rosa, it's remarkable. I remember just that some people resonate, some people don't. And I remember clearly a open house I was doing in Brighton, and this guy came in. Most people, they'll come and they'll see the work and then they leave. And this guy stood, and there were about 3 or 4 groups of people who came in and went out and came in and went out. And this man stood and he was looking at the painting. He was really, really looking. He was looking at them and he was thinking about it and he was considering, and his brow was furrowed. And like eventually, after about half an hour, 45 minutes, I said to him, "So, like, what do you think?" And he said, "They'd be better without the foxes." And yet, I absolutely loved it because he really, really looked at it and he really thought about it. And that kind of interaction is priceless.
yeah, that is, and that wasn't what you were expecting, because
Not
it
at
was
all. I thought
really
I was
all
going to get a
about the
sale.
fox.
Exactly.
That is such an
Fox.
awesome story. And so we've said, okay, who's your biggest support, but who's your biggest critic?
Oh, I think my biggest critic would have to be me, Rose. I'm
Yeah.
very, very hard on myself. I think you have to be if you're going to keep growing. And I think that's why the support that you often need is people to give you balance to that. So I think yeah.
As long as
It would be
it's in a positive way, not in a negative way. The inner critic.
Absolutely. I think that's the thing, and there's always work to be done with that. And I think that inner critic can be a very powerful tool, as much as it can be debilitating and crippling in a lot of ways. I think when you realize that like I always wonder about who is that inner critic. Like when you're talking to yourself or beating yourself or giving yourself praise, it's like, who are you actually talking to? Like, it really doesn't make sense, because the voice in my head is not the same.
Yeah. It's that voice of head we've dragged through childhood since very little. And,
Yes.
as long as we're aware of it and we can change the meaning to what
Well,
it's
I
giving,
think that's
am I good enough? Then you've got to change it. I'm good enough. I'm brilliant. I'm global. And that's not motivational.
I think looking at, I think there's always, there's flags, and you can choose whether you're going to accept it outright or if you're going to use that to push yourself further and to grow. And I think that's really important.
That is amazing if you are, taking it for that. So, Andrew, let me ask you, what's next? What's next?
Well, as you mentioned earlier, I decided about a year and a half ago that I'd like to start going away from painting and more into sculpture. So to facilitate that, I thought, well, how can I learn? I'm a little bit old to go back to school again. And I thought, what's the best way for me to do that? And I'm a great believer in manifesting things. And at the same time, my brother-in-law, he's been doing really well with his sculpture, and he's gotten to the point where he needed a studio assistant, and they offered me a job. And I thought, oh wow, like I've been thinking about going to sculpture, sure. So I've been working with him for the last 8 or 9 months. And the next step is I've been invited to take part in an outdoor sculpture festival in Stellenbosch. So public arts, going bigger instead of doing the micro, going bigger. So that's very, very exciting as well.
Andrew, that's very exciting, because I know you did a sculpture project in Swellendam.
Right.
So I think maybe we can have another conversation where we can talk about that incredible work you did in that forest. Musbicus Cliff, I think it's called, and then maybe link that onto your sculpture story, because
Rose, you've hit the nail on the head. I think like often you put energy into something and you can't immediately see the outcome. But if I hadn't have done that project, I would not have received the invitation. Next to the Foxman is the sculpture festival in Stellenbosch. So I've got a couple of months to get ready for that and work out details. And then installation will be at the end of September. And the festival, I think, runs from the 1st to the 10th of October. In the meantime, I'm working on a body of work of sculpture of my own. And then, we'll see where we go from there.
Andrew, that's amazing. I remember you did an incredible project in Swellendam that took off slowly and then just grew into something quite beautiful, where you did all those sculptures in the forest. And this is such a beautiful link to that.
It's exactly that, Rose. And I think without doing that project, the opportunity that's presented itself now wouldn't have happened. I mean, that was very, it was really, it was a labor of love. So we took a piece of municipal land that had been abandoned. It was infested with wattle and blue gums, and we made about 2.5 kilometers of hiking trail, and then we ran an environmental sculpture competition with the local high schools. I was alarmed that the local high schools didn't do arts, so I thought, well, what a great interface is when you're doing you're doing creative thinking. I just think in a country like South Africa with so many issues, we need creative thinkers, and I think your building block of that is other arts, to inspire, to think big, to not be constrained by those little boxes that are constantly trying to hem us in. And as part of that competition, we ran workshops. One was about the environment, about biodiversity, about alien vegetation, reforestation, those sorts of things. And then the other one was with Stratum van der Merwe, who's South Africa's #1 land artist. And it was through working with Stratum that I think this opportunity has come through. He's one of the organizers of the events. And just a note on Stratum, he's such an inspiration. I bumped into him the other day, and I think this is so important for me. It's probably the most valuable lesson that I could learn. And it's just, I mean, he's an art superstar. Everybody who wants to be an artist, that there's like a 0.001% of artists who make it into this the stratosphere of fame and fortune. And I bumped into him in a coffee shop, and I said, "Oh, Stratum, like, do you remember me?" And he kind of didn't remember me, and he smiled politely because he's polite. And then he went, and I said, "Oh, Andrew," and he said, "I just send you an invitation." And he said, "This is just my way of giving back for everything you did for me." And he's the most humble, wonderful, caring human being, thoughtful, insightful. And I think that's a real inspiration to know that no matter where you go, you remember to stay grateful and stay humble for what you have.
Fantastic, Andrew. And I'm just going to ask you, do you have any words of inspiration for people out there that feel they have a talent, but how do they actually begin, Because it's not an overnight journey.
Gosh, no. And I think there's a part of you that has to develop quite a thick skin. And I think I had a friend who we were drawing together, and I had a blank piece of paper, and I said to him, I just, when you get a blank piece of paper, I just don't know how to begin. And he said, I can help you with that. And he leant over and he took the paper and he took his pencil, he just did this big line all the way across it. And he said, "There you go. It's not blank anymore."
That's amazing.
So, I mean, I think the thing is to just start. If you follow your joy, it's like you follow what makes you happy. If you do something and it makes you smile, or it makes you giggle, or whatever it is, or you have that little moment where you go, that's cool. It's like, do it again, and then do it again, and then do it again. And I think there's so much about our world today with social media and things like that demands this. I think Simon Sinek does it. He says our millennials, they see the top of the mountain and they want to be there, and they'll quit after 2 years or 3 years. But that's the journey. You're talented. You've got to put in the work. You're not going to get in there. It's not an Instagram post. You don't take a picture and fabricate what you want and then you're there. Most of those people that you're seeing, they have been working for years and years and years to get where they are. So it's like, don't lose heart. Don't give up. If it makes you happy, keep doing it. And you keep doing it. And that energy that you put in, it comes back. Not always in the way that we expect. So maybe that's the other thing, is to stay open to possibilities. Sometimes we get tunnel vision and we say, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to do. This is what I want to do. Not realizing that there's a whole world opening up just over here. So I think,
exactly.
So put in the work. If it makes you happy, follow it. It'll come back in ways you couldn't possibly imagine.
So your metaphor to artists is not drawing a line in the sand, but drawing a line on the page and focus. and do what you're happy doing. Andrew, it's been absolutely amazing and inspiring speaking to you. Thank you for sharing your precious time. And please let our listeners know, where can they get hold of you? How can they get in touch with you?
Rose, thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure. You can find me on Facebook at Andrew James Hofmeyer, or if you want a quicker fix, Instagram at AKA Foxman.
Thank you so much, Andrew. And I'm looking forward to our next interview. Take care. Have a beautiful day.
Rose.